I think we're going to go ahead and get started here this morning. About 3 months ago, I was talking to Steve about this talk, and he said, don't come over here and be an American's American. He said, act like somebody killed your puppy for the whole week that you were over here, and that you'll fit right in the British crowd. Like, that's the kind of attitude you want. Don't be jumping around on stage. And about 2 o'clock last night, I became patient zero with con flu. I got up, and I was sick during the middle of the night. So yeah, really cut it down here a couple of notches. So I'm going to go ahead and give this talk, Security Lessons from Dictators. I come from a very B-sides background, so there are questions in here. There are question slides. We're going to stop and we're going to have discussions. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. There's a saying that I love and I kind of live by: if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I try to never be in the wrong room. And I just seeing some of the people out here, I know I'm not in the wrong room this morning. So this talk is supposed to drive some conversations and some thoughts, and you're going to leave here and say, wow, that was a valid point. There's going to be other slides. You're going to say, wow, this guy's an idiot and doesn't know what he's talking about. And that's fine. I'm willing to have a discussion on all these points. I believe them, and I think they hold true, but I'm willing to change my opinion. About me, my name is Jerry Gamblin. I have a 4-year-old son at home that I'm trying to teach soccer to so that he can come over here and play in the EPL one day maybe. Here's my contact information. You can get me on Twitter. It's probably the easiest. It's @jgamblin. My website is jerrygamblin.com. During my day job, I'm the network security specialist for the Missouri House of Representatives. It's a small organization. We have 163 state representatives, so my job is to make sure they don't do stupid stuff and end up in the newspaper. That's basically everybody's security. You know, when you're security in politics, you're mostly protecting your users from the papers. Is kind of the way that works. This is Ferris Bueller. He was my hero growing up. He had a show called Win Ferris Bueller's Money. He was a history nut. I'm a history nut. So I was thinking about what talk I could give here today, and this kind of came together. I started thinking about dictators and leaders through the ages, and I'm like, wow, these guys make a lot of stupid security mistakes. Hey, I'll make a talk about this, and it should be fairly entertaining. Oh, that's not Ferris Bueller. That's Ben Stein. I'm sorry. I'm having a day. And we're supposed to win Ben Stein's money. That is Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller. I'm not trying to put anybody to sleep, so ask questions, be interactive, jeer me from the audience, it's fine. Mark Twain is from Missouri, and he says history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And you're going to see this as we walk through these next slides. Insider threats, everybody can deal with this, right? Julius Caesar became emperor of Rome. During the civil war he had with Brutus, Brutus fought against him in the first civil war. He brought him back into the fold. You know, they became pretty good friends. Caesar pardoned him in 48, made him governor in 46, and then in 44 he murdered Caesar. We do this all the time, right? Insider threats are difficult, if not impossible, to stop. We think we know somebody. We say, oh, yeah, you can be, you're here, you're good. I'm going to let you have access to this. I'm going to let you in my inner circle. I'm going to let you on my security team. Because let's be honest, when we talk about insider threats, most of the insider threats here come from the IT staff. There hasn't been a very widespread of an accountant or somebody in HR leaking a bunch of information. All the major leaks have come from people who are in IT-type backgrounds. So it's the guys who work in your office that are going to be the insider threats. How does your company defend against insider threats? What does your insider threat program look like? Anybody just try to not hire bad people? Is that kind of the standard operating system?
That's what I call the security clearance system.
Yeah, and I pass a security background check every year, so let's just say it's not the best in the world. You cannot detect and defend against insider threats from behind a keyboard. I know companies want to sell you insider threat protection, They want to tell you that DLP is the best insider threat protection, or better yet, super glue all your USB ports shut and you're fine. You have to be a social security person. You have to know what your network is. You got to know, oh, so-and-so is going through a divorce and, they maybe need an extra $50,000 and have access to all our intellectual property. Maybe we should watch them a little bit closer. It's more about knowing your employees and knowing your customers instead of knowing the technology. And it's not a technical issue alone. You got to have a lot of buy-in to work with insider threats. You have to have your HR system buy-in. You got to have your leadership buy-in. You cannot fix insider threats from the IT shop. And if they say that you can, you need to really have a discussion about what a real insider threats are. And the truth is, people who do insider threats are not hackers. Stealing information that you have legitimate access to, copying it to a USB drive does not make you a hacker. Everybody wants to call Edward Snowden a hacker. Since he's been in Russian hands, he's come out and said, I did some stuff I didn't have legal access to, but the first 3 or 4 months of his story was all, I had access to this data, and I copied it off. That doesn't make you a hacker. That means you know how to use Windows Explorer. I mean, it's literally that simple. Could you identify an Edward Snowden on your network today and stop him? We couldn't. I have very few, I know nobody who could sit here and tell me that they could stop Edward. I mean, you talk about background checks to stop these people. He cleared background checks all the time. Same thing with Manning. Manning cleared background checks all the time. You can't stop these people from a technical point. It has to be done through your HR system, through your leadership system, through that kind of buy-in, through your program, through your employee assistance program, so you know when people are having personal problems and personal issues that you can step in and stop those. Incident response. How many people here do incident response for a company? 3, a couple people who are not consultants. Because doing incident response inside a company and being an incident response consultant are 2 different worlds altogether. I'm going to talk about Napoleon. I love this story just because it's so great. The Duke of Anningham was German royalty, and he had moved to, it was French royalty, and he'd moved to Germany after Napoleon took over. Napoleon thought that he was trying to assassinate him, so he sent his troops to Germany to pick the guy up. So French troops go to Germany, pick up the Duke, bring him back to France. During this time, it is found out this guy had nothing to do with it. It was a rumor on top of a rumor on top of a rumor, and the guy was innocent. But if we know anything about Napoleon, we know that you just can't let him go. So he took him to a moat, shot him, dumped him in the hole. Does anybody read French? What does it say?
It's worse than a crime, it's a mistake.
Yeah, and I think that should be like on every network security office. Committing a crime is one thing. When you create a mistake, especially in incident response or network security, it kind of rides with your reputation. The first time you yell wolf the wrong time, we've been hacked, we got to unplug our network, I don't know how many young guys come and say, we got to turn this down, or somebody got on the sequel with no evidence. You have to have your evidence lined up to be able to do it. What does your incident response plan look like in real life? I mean, I have the binder that sits on my shelf that says, if we're hacked, pull out the binder, go to page 1, and start doing all these things. But I found a GIF that kind of illustrates what it looks like when my boss thinks that we're hacked. That's exactly what incident response looks like in real life. Oh no, what are we going to do? We got to do something. No time to think, just take action. So that's what we do. I can make fun of Americans since I'm not in America. This is probably one of the best stories of the last year. The Economic Development Administration got a pretty simple malware infection, and they needed to take care of it because they knew malware was really, really bad. So they started destroying computer equipment, monitors, keyboards, mice, and they destroyed $3 million worth of equipment. They would have destroyed more, but the recycling budget of $250,000 ran out. So the only thing that saved them from destroying every computer that they owned was the lack of money to send it to a proper recycler. On the other hand, NOAA, the weather service in America, bought a corporate license of Malwarebytes and removed the virus in like 2 weeks. So we do that all the time, right? It's fun to make fun of these guys, but I know a ton of people who jump to that same conclusion. Oh no, it's broke, let's reformat everything, when you could just step back and take a look. How can we be better investigators? What's the first rule of investigation? Get all the facts before you take any actions, right? We want to do all the actions before we get all the facts. And it really, really puts us in a bind because I don't...
Is that our fault, though? Because most of the business wants us to just turn around and get it fixed as soon as possible. They don't care about why it happened. They just want it fixed.
No, I think that's a good point. That's a very fair point, is that a lot of the businesses want action, but if you don't know the problem, you can't fix it, right? It's like calling the plumber and saying, my toilet's overflowing, but your toilet's not really the problem. It's you have a clogged up drain pipe down the street. You can pay the plumber to mess with the toilet, but it's not going to fix the problem, until a day later when it's like, well, I've already spent $1,000 replacing this toilet with a brand new one. It's not going to work. Oh, now let me go look and see that, your rose bush out front is now in the middle of your drain pipe. Hacking back. We have any active defense experts in the room? All right. Talk about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is an American hero, but he was a dictator. It's kind of a little known fact, but the state of Maryland was a northern state in the American Civil War. It's set between Virginia, this is Virginia, and this is Maryland, and D.C. is right here. Maryland had a lot of Confederate sympathizers, and they were moving troops from the Union troops from north to the south to defend D.C. And in Maryland and Baltimore in particular, they decided to stop these troops. So they had a little insurrection, and irregulars were stopping troop movements. So Abraham Lincoln thought he would do what he does. He says, you're just arrest these guys, stop them from doing it. We're going to suspend habeas corpus. You have complete control of this city. There's just one little problem with that. The Constitution says that the only people who can do that are the Congress. They have to come in and vote on it. And the Congress is split at this time, and they were not going to vote on that. So Abraham Lincoln was there's one other case, but it doesn't matter in this instance. But this went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. If you can suspend habeas corpus, we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a dictatorship, and you're the dictator. So he was pretty heavily rebuked by the Supreme Court. John Huntsman, who I really, really like, was an American candidate for president on the Republican ticket 2 years ago. He's also the ambassador to China. In a really interesting case, he said, if somebody breaks into your network, you should be able to go back, break in, and steal it back as long as you don't do any harm to their network. So he was the first kind of politician that came out and said that hacking back should be allowed and that you should be able to do it. Sadly, it's the Wild West. Everybody was getting their guns and ready to go because Huntsman, who was the ambassador, said, let's do this. So everybody went and bought a new ski mask for their IT shop for their hackers so that they could get back in the hacking back space. The Department of Justice came back and said, I would like to remind you, we'd politely remind them there's a federal criminal statute barring that. That if you decide to try to hack back in America in any form, you're committing a felony. There's no, but they stole my ball law in America. We want it to be, but it's just not there. So we get the big dough, the Homer Simpson dough, because it just doesn't work out in America for us to do that. What do you think the future of active defense looks like?
It doesn't, hopefully.
There's no active defense?
There's active defense, but there's not active back.
And that line is blurred depending on who you talk to. So, do you think we're going to have do you think there'll ever be a time where there's active hacking back in corporate environments? Not that anybody would admit, yep. And we were talking, so what are you going to do when you hack back? I mean, it's a file. If somebody comes in and steals your files, you can't go and steal them back because they can be copied 4,000 times, you know. I'm stealing it back. Advanced tools over proven techniques. I'm going to talk about Adolf Hitler here. This is a little touchy, and I'm going to go ahead and Godwin myself here and just ruin my whole presentation because this is Mike Godwin if you've never seen him. And have you ever heard of Godwin's Law that says, you know, if you make a Nazi reference, your point is invalid. So we're just going to go ahead and do that right now. Adolf Hitler was the Führer of Germany. He spent a massive amount of money on wonder weapons, they were called. The V2, the V1, the Horton Who, which is literally the first stealth bomber in the 1940s. Here's a picture of my great uncle standing in front of one in Germany at the end of the war. That's kind of why I've been interested in history. And he came over and they were taking pictures. It was kind of a weird thing, you know. And it's always been said that Hitler probably could have won the war or lasted longer if he wouldn't have invested so much money in building wonder weapons towards the end. So instead, he turned to using 16-year-old boys to defend Berlin at the end. And towards the end, it got even worse, and he started using, you know, any able-bodied person. They would just put them on the bus and give them a rifle. But we never do anything. We don't like wonder weapons in IT security at all, do we? I see this all the time, right? I see everybody in my staff has to have a CISSP, but we don't do any end-user training, and security awareness is the worst thing. But the guy who runs my SQL is a CISSP because that's what we do, right? We have a patch management system. We have a next-generation firewall. We have all the big checks. Like Cisco loves us because we write them a huge check every year to be up to date. But we don't do the simple stuff, and we never do. You know, we have Shadow IT has taken over because our help desk won't respond to good questions. No one actually checks the logs. We have a $3 million SIM sitting there, and the dashboard is really cool, and the director might look at it, but we don't have a full-time SIM operator. But we have a SIM because we needed the checkbox. You have no auditing of web apps, and the end users still have admin rights because our help desk guys hate to go out and do help desk calls. So if we leave everybody with admin rights, we don't have to deal with that. Why do security professionals have such a hard time getting the basics right?
Because we haven't figured out what the basics are.
I mean, that's true. I think it's a little bit like, in American basketball, there's a three-point line, and if you watch little kids play basketball, the first thing you're supposed to learn in basketball is how to shoot a layup. But you watch little kids, the first thing they want to do is go out to the three-point line and just start chunking up very long shots because that's what all the professionals do, and it looks really cool. And I think that's the same way in IT. Like, you can do some pretty unglamorous stuff like check your logs, remove your admin rights, and take care of the little things, but that's not sexy and cool. You know, it's not a SIM, it's not a new IPS. So it's way, way easier to go out and drop a bunch of money on something new and say, look at how cool that is. Poor security awareness training. This is the Shah of Iran. Just a little brief history on their nuclear program. In 1957, we thought it was a good idea that Iran had nuclear programs after we had overthrown their government and put our puppet government in place there. And then in 1979, they had the revolution, and all of a sudden, it was a very bad idea for them to have a nuclear program. So we've spent the last 40 years, 30 years trying to stop their nuclear program. President Obama and Bibi Netanyahu really tried in their first couple of years to do this. They killed 6 Iranian nuclear scientists in Iran, mostly with covert special ops stuff, magnet bombs on cars. But then they found out that really wasn't working, and the easiest thing to do was to attack this, because they kept getting more scientists, but they couldn't find more of these S7-300s. So, they dropped USB drives in one of the most secure locations in the world, and people picked them up. But Bruce Schreiner says, oh, we don't need security awareness. Security awareness is a waste of time. Who needs to spend time on security awareness? Your users don't need to know that the internet is bad and not to plug in stuff. You should be able to take care of that by technology. Yeah. So the Americans couldn't get into the Iranian nuclear site at all. But from the stories we hear, they dropped 5 or 6 USB drives on the road leading up to it because they knew the nuclear scientists walked into it. They picked them up, and they got Stuxnet installed on the systems. It was that simple. What are your thoughts on security awareness? This is a huge deal in America. There's a fight a week on Twitter about if we should or shouldn't have security awareness program and if it works. And anybody? Yeah, if you have a PCI, that you have to do it.
If it's all about following rules and not knowing why you're following them, then it's probably worthless. But if you're actually able to educate people as to why we're doing things and why we have security restrictions and rules in place, and they start understanding, then they're going to be on your side.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I've had this fight at my work. It's we can't teach the HR ladies about network security. They're not smart enough to know that. I'm these are the ladies that I depend on every 2 weeks to make sure I get a check in my bank account. If they can pay me every 2 weeks, they can listen to me babble for 15 minutes about how not to get hacked on Facebook. We underestimate our users. It's our superiority complex as IT guys, as IT professionals. 95% of IT professionals think they're better than everybody else in the world. Just ask them.
The other problem with this is that it's not interactive enough.
Oh, no, exactly.
Talk at the staff instead of finding out what they know and then meeting where they are.
And it really has to be a close and intimate kind of training, and we do that where I work. We do a lunch and learn. We buy some pizzas, and they come in, and we kind of walk through some of the latest news, and you'll be amazed how much your staff keeps up on technology news just by what they read on the internet.
What I've seen be pretty effective is custom phishing campaigns.
Yes.
Where you actually see how many people in your organization click on links, and then you report the results to them so they get an understanding of more of the effect of what happens if they do let their guard, especially in the political.
Exactly.
We've got a social engineering list where all of our admins are trained to recognize social engineering efforts, and it becomes very entertaining to see some of the reactions that they get, and that makes them more willing and more likely to be aware of social engineering efforts in the future.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. If you mess up, if you say, I think this is social engineering and it's not, all you've done is cost somebody 20 minutes for another phone call, whatever your thing is. Call me back on your known cell phone number so I can see that it's you type thing. So there's really no loss in doing good social engineering stuff except for some time. Misplaced priorities. I think that this is a big deal with IT security in general. Leader of North Korea. North Korea has a pretty strong nuclear program. And they also have hovercrafts because every nation needs hovercrafts. Photoshopped hovercrafts. They have 2, but they photoshopped this picture for 4 more. I'm glad somebody else remembered that. They also have the highest rate of childhood starvation in the world. So, it's misplaced priorities. They have kids that are dying every day in North Korea because they don't feed them, but they spend their money on that. And we do a little bit something similar to that in IT security. I don't know how many companies I know that send their folks to black hat training or any kind of training that costs thousands of dollars. But if you go look at all their desktops, they're still running Windows XP, which was from 2005. What do your priorities look like? Do you have a security priorities list? If you're a security practitioner, creating a good list of what you need to do, what you want to accomplish, is one of the best things you can do. I sit down with my boss every other month and we say, okay, here's the top 5 things that we want to do. Which of these things can we do, and which of these things are going to lag? And we really have to start working on those lists, because if not, you end up saying, hey, I'm going to go to DEF CON, but we're going to leave our OSs that run our financial systems on Windows XP because it's too much work to figure out the new Windows 7 hooks for them. So what does your priority list look like? If you're in banking or a highly regulated industry, a little bit, yes. Most of it, I see that it's dictated by laziness, and that's a hard thing to say, but I know a lot of lazy people in IT. It's like, we can do this, but you're going to have to figure out how to make it work. And their answer is, but this works already. Why would I want to spend 2 weeks on it? And I don't understand that mentality, and I think that mentality makes us less secure overall. Thank you for listening today. Sorry I went fast. I'm not really feeling that well. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. All of these I try to apply. I try to look for insider threats. I try to understand that if somebody's going to steal all the information from our network, it's going to be a guy in IT, just because that's the way it shakes out. I'm not super worried about somebody in HR or somebody in our appropriations department, because the likelihood of them stealing stuff isn't very high. History has taught us that most insider threats are made by people in IT shops. And also to make sure that I'm doing the small stuff right. If I take care of all the small stuff, moving administrator rights from Windows invalidates something like 75% of all malware attacks. So that is something super easy that we can do. But if you walk into 20 companies, probably, you'll find 5 that still have their regular users running as admins.
I'd be interested to...
Hang on a second.
Oh dear. I'd be interested to see the stats on whether the thefts from companies or data theft is purely from IT, because isn't that a bit like saying that most money stolen from companies is by accountants? It's what you have access to. But also your HR people still have access to names, addresses, bank account details, etc. So far be it from me to question your research if you've done it, but I'd be interested to see really what kind of balances there are between different roles and theft.
No, I would love to see those numbers too. And my research is purely just reading and keeping up on insider threats. And if you dig through them, and all the big ones, the Snowdens, the Mannings, those have all been IT guys or are in IT roles. And and if you stop those guys there, then you know what they're doing.
Mm. And I'm sorry, I've got the microphone now. I'm going to keep it. So, and the other thing you mentioned about, Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning, and, that we couldn't have stopped them. They had their security checks in place and all that sort of thing. I think neither of those things that happened were really black swan events. It's not like you look back and say there was no point at any time that we could have ever foreseen that this would have happened with these individuals. I think with the analysis, obviously hindsight, with the analysis, I think it was kind of obvious, especially with Manning, that he was the wrong person in the wrong job under extreme pressures that should have been noted and should have been picked up on. So,
oh, yeah, no, definitely. His background check failed him. That's why when they said, everybody has a background check, it's easy to get a background check in America. I mean...
It's a failure of aftercare rather than the initial background check.
Yes.
People's background checks are like PCI assessments right that are clear today.
Yep.
And then they ignore it for, in the UK, 10 years.
A point in time, yep. Well, we got time. It's just between us and lunch.
You've
Between us and the alcohol.
Yeah.
you've learned from the mistakes that people have made in history. Have you learned anything from the positive things that people have done, things that people have done right in history?
You know, that's a really good question, and I kind of like the Obama model. Is you give somebody a job and you let them do it, and you don't micromanage. If you read about it when he was on the campaign trail, that's what he would do. He would say, "You're in charge of this. You take care of this, and I'm not going to micromanage." And if you're in IT security and you can step back and say, "Okay, you take care of this and work on it, and tell me when it's done," you'll really take a lot of your plates down and be able to actually manage what you're supposed to do.
Hi there. So where do you draw the line between a whistleblower appropriating information to an organization of compliance versus someone who's just stealing the data? That's a pretty tough one for a security guy.
Yeah, and that's a great question. In America, we have whistleblower laws that say this is how you do it correctly, but at some time it just comes down to gut feel, and everybody has a different feeling when somebody steals a bunch of data and releases it. Like, I think that, just my personal opinion, I think that Manning was trying to reach out and trying to actually stop something, and I think Snowden was in it for the publicity. If I was, my personal opinion, which could be wrong, but that's just the way that I think it breaks down to me. Like, Manning was obviously a troubled person and was looking for somebody to help him or to talk to him or to be his friend. And, and Snowden stole all the information and went to Hong Kong because he thought America couldn't get him there, so.
Thank you.
So, do you think that as security people, we go beyond what our realm of expertise is when we try to define these terms as to what's a whistleblower, what's this, what's that? Ultimately, it's data that's left the company unauthorized. The motives, the reasons, the punishments, the politics around it are generally, by and large, outside of our, they're just opinions, they're not professional facts. Do you think we make a lot of mistakes as, security researchers and people who give their opinions on Twitter, which is always very well weighted? Do you see that as an issue?
I think so. I mean, our job is to be the gatekeepers pretty well and to stop the ones and zeros, but everybody's going to have an opinion on why somebody did something. And there's a saying in America that everybody has an opinion and everybody has a rear end, and they both stink. So, you're going to find somebody who doesn't agree with you, but that's what we do. We make judgments on things. But you're right, in a strictly IT security job, our job is to be the gatekeepers and try to stop data from coming out the backside. Any more questions? All right. Thank you. There's my contact information.